The future's annoyingly hard to predict, but by combining demographics and other big picture trends, our regular guest on this podcast, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, can at least give his predictions a strong data-driven foundation. And in today's show, I'm going to chat with Simon about our future population growth, some of the advantages, but some of the challenges this is going to bring. And we're also going to talk about how innovative Australia might be a decade from now. I'm going to ask him whether millennials can actually save Australia's future as we explore the role of demographics, innovation, and investment in shaping the future of Australia. Oh, this is not just about Australia's future, it's about your future. So I really hope you're going to get lots out of it. So join us as we explore the potential of millennials to drive innovation and propel Australia towards a prosperous future.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Australia's population is booming with record high net overseas migration as well as natural population growth. Now, the official population data only gets published every 6 months or so, with quite a delay, a 6-month delay. But you can get an updated estimate from something called the Australian Property Clock. You can Google that. And that's interesting because it estimates that we've had one birth every minute and 43 seconds. So since the introduction of this podcast, there's already been a baby born. One death every 3 minutes and 10 seconds. There's a person arriving in Australia every 44 seconds. One Australian citizen leaving to go overseas 1 minute every minute and 53 seconds. But interestingly, add all this up and our population is growing at about one person every 55 seconds. So putting all this together, our current population is over 26,400,000 people. However, this rapid growth also presents numerous challenges, and these need to be addressed to ensure that we've got a sustainable, a thriving future for our nation. And that's what I want to chat with leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, co-founder of the Demographics Group, about today. Simon shares his thoughts on socio-demographic trends in the media, in his weekly column in the New Daily, as well as his regular columns in the Australian. He shares them with Australian government departments, institutions and companies, and I'm pleased that he's a regular guest on this podcast. Hi, Simon.
It's great to be back on.
Now, Simon, clearly our strong migration and rapid population growth has got advantages, but it's also got some challenges. But let's start with the positives. There are some significant economic benefits from having not just a growing population, but a wealthy growing population. I think that's a caveat we have to put on it.
Exactly. So the reason why we tend to grow in Australia our population base via migration rather than just relying on having more births than deaths every year is because migrants are outrageously financially attractive. Remember that a person in their first 22 or 23 years or so of their life is very expensive. If you look at me, for example, I was born in Germany. My birth cost money. I was put through childcare that cost the state money, primary school, secondary school, tertiary education. In the meantime, I broke arms, mostly my own, and it was very, very expensive to get me to 23 years of age. And how did I thank the German state? By immigrating. So that's a terrible deal for Germany. But if you think about this, Australia gained a fully qualified migrant, and they didn't have to pay for the first 23 years of the life. And in Australia, 2/3 of our population growth, on average, come from overseas migration. So it's a very cheap way to grow the population base. That's wonderful. And because we run a skilled migration scheme, meaning the vast majority of our migrants come here simply because they hold a certain qualification that Australia needs. So there's a thing called the skilled migration list. And if your qualification is on the list, you can come to Australia, essentially. That's a nice model.
It is, but it also, I guess, creates some challenges. I mean, one that's in the media a lot is housing and affordability. Where are they all going to live? Because they don't bring houses with them. There's a shortage of houses. There's a shortage of rental accommodation. Very few large-scale developments coming out of the ground. I guess policymakers have to do more than just talk about housing affordability, more than just talk about providing accommodation, because that's all it's been so far.
Absolutely. And the total madness in Australia is that we have a housing policy and an immigration policy that are not linked. Theoretically, you can amp up migration as much as you want without guaranteeing that there is enough housing in the pipeline to take care for the housing needs of all those people. That's just silly. We do need to fix this, and we do need housing quotas that are linked to the migration intake. Otherwise, we're building ourselves into a problem, and that ultimately leads to anti-migration sentiments, which again, there's no reason that a city becomes more or less livable based on the number of people in it. It depends on how are those people housed and what kind of infrastructure is being provided to those people. And at the moment, if you look back for the last 2 decades or so, we did not grow infrastructure at the same rate than we grew our population base. So, of course, you can say migration contributed to our housing problems, but you could also say migration completely helped us to grow into a knowledge economy, to get the average Australian richer. But at what cost? Because the biggest cost of living, housing, went through the roof, so to speak, and that is ultimately undesirable.
Well, you talked about housing, but also I guess that other challenge is infrastructure and public services, and we've fallen behind there. Our healthcare system's having difficulty with coping. Our education system is having difficulty. There's just not enough teachers. Our overcrowded schools, our roads are going to be even more congested. So you're right, there should be a couple of ministers sitting in the same room, looking at each other in the face and getting their policies in alignment. Another issue is, I guess, environmental sustainability. Can we really sustain such a growing population, Simon?
Yeah, so if you look at the environmental issue, you want to be very clear whether you talk about local issues or global issues. If you talk about global warming, global climate change, then saying Australia needs to be small doesn't make sense, because this human would either live in Australia or another country. So ultimately their CO2 emissions would still occur to pretty much the same rate. So our environmental concerns should always be more local in nature. That means we should ensure as a nation that we don't build over rare and important farmland, for example. We need to make sure that we build relevant housing and sustainable housing. That includes the quality of a build. Too often we rush to bulldozing a quarter-acre block and then put 3 or 4 very crappy townhouses on there that are so poor in their quality of build that in 3 decades' time they need to be completely bulldozed. And that is, of course, an unnecessary environmental expense. It is an unnecessary financial expense, and it binds too much workers that we don't really have.
You come from Europe. When I travel there, I love staying in hotels that are older than Australia. But here in Australia, we pull down things built 25, 30 years ago and don't think twice about it.
Exactly, and that's a shame. I'm always joking that if 2 Europeans meet in Australia, it takes about 2 minutes until they start complaining about the poor insulation of homes here. That, of course, has a certain historical backdrop that heating or cooling a house was relatively cheap. Because if you own your house, you have relatively little costs. Electricity is relatively cheap, so you can just cool the box and pay as you go, rather than pay a higher cost for a better insulated home up front. That's an issue that's probably not going to work anymore. So really, and we're seeing the tightenings here. We're seeing building standards being tightened and tightened. It gets harder and harder and more expensive to build a decent home to meet all those important standards. And that is, of course, adding to the cost of housing. So housing becomes more expensive because we demand the house to deliver a better quality of life. But yet again, that comes at a cost, and in a market where lots of people are probably locked out of home ownership, that will increasingly create a couple of problems.
Well, another problem that could occur, is probably occurring a bit, is that while migration still contributes to Australia's population growth, it's important to address the challenges related to social cohesion, to integration. Newcomers face language barriers, cultural differences, and despite our improvement, there's still discrimination happening in my mind.
Oh, absolutely. So if you look at a country like Australia, 26 million people, there will be no shortage of racial discrimination, of racist incidents. They'll occur aplenty on any given day. You can fill papers with that, no challenge. But ultimately, if you think about the sheer level of multicultural mix that we have in this country, well over a third of the population was born overseas. In a city like Sydney, you have well over 50% of the population with a migration background, meaning at least one of their parents was born overseas. We are hyper international, multicultural. We're doing this extremely well, but some of those integrating efforts do take time. If you think about the racial evil stereotypes that are floating around at the moment, most of them are directed towards more recent migration groups to Australia, so largely against Asians or Arab migrants, whereas all those really strong stereotypes and outright hatred towards the Greek and Italian migrants, the WOGs from the 50s and 60s, are now a thing of the past, because they have been completely integrated into Australia. And Australians always start the integration into the social fabric through the cuisine first. We started with a bland English diet of meat and potato and a bit of tea. And all of a sudden along came the Mediterraneans, and we realized they have much better food on offer. And we took them up on it. we happily made their cuisine ours. And we're now doing this more and more with the Asian cuisine. A stir fry is a stock standard Australian dinner item, for example. Everybody is eating hummus. All those things are the first precursors of a full integration of new migrant groups into Australia. But this type of social integration does take time. It takes a couple of decades. It takes to the next generation. Until then, kids mix in school and things become a bit more normalized. So I'm very optimistic that ultimately we are managing let's call it the ethnic, the national integration of people. Because if you look at most suburbs, if you look at the kindergartens and schools that your kids and grandkids go to, this is a very colorful bunch of people that is living together. But what we're increasingly seeing is that all the people that your kids go to school with are just as rich or as poor as you are. We are increasingly doing well at integrating different sexual preferences and ethnicities, but we are very much segregating the country based on lines about socioeconomic standards.
Well, a lot of that has to do with where people live. So the kids living in the poorer, outer, in general, working class, first homeowner areas, they're suffering more at the moment with inflation, rising cost of living, rising rents compared to the inner suburbs. So there is a wealth inequality in our cities, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And we can see where the pandemic hit most. Everyone is impacted to a certain degree by the rising costs of living. But the better off you are, then it's just a bit of a nuisance rather than a real threat to your family and to your existence. So we're seeing this more and more. You see this in Victoria when they hand out an electricity bonus of $250. That everybody likes that. Everybody enjoys $250 in the pocket. But how big is the difference? For some households, it's almost no difference, but for some households, this makes the difference.
Well, we started talking about Australia's significant population growth, and so it'll probably get to about 29 million people by the end of this decade, 2030, and that's going to come around pretty quickly. Would have probably been a bit higher than that hadn't we closed down our doors for COVID. But one of the questions you asked your readers in your column in the New Daily was, how are we going to cope with innovation, and will millennials rescue our country from an innovation funding crisis? What did you mean by this? What are your concerns?
So this is just a demographic phenomenon where money is flowing to. So you have a big generation, the baby boomers, moving increasingly into retirement, moving into old age. That means they want their money, and they have a lot of money, they want their money to be safe. So they are more likely to invest into stable and safe assets, predictable assets. They are less likely to throw a lot of money at high risk, early startup type products. So that means you have probably less money flowing to those innovations. So where is that money coming from? Well, you have the big fat millennial generation now reaching the highest spending and highest earning phase of the life cycle bit by bit. So you'd hope that they, when they are in their 40s, that they still have enough money available to really invest into cool up and coming organizations, because that will make Australia stronger, more innovative, more future fit. And the risk is that every single penny that the millennials earns will be gobbled up by ever more expensive housing costs. And that then means this money isn't flowing there. But so that means if you're pessimistic about Australia, the one place that will see capital flow to is property, because property has always been doing well in Australia. It's safe. It's to a high degree predictable because of the demographics that are associated with housing. I'm very optimistic about future financial flows into the property market, particularly when I look ahead to the 2030s, which will be the craziest decade and best decade for the housing market that Australia has ever seen, at least from a demographic perspective, because then you have the baby boomer population die and downsize at scale, meaning you have heaps of property, and they tend to own decent sized property in attractive middle suburbs of Australia, come online, enter the market. So the market is flooded with really interesting objects, and the money that flows from a dying baby boomer to their millennial kids, it hits people in their 50s this time around. So people that already are homeowners, they might still have to have a mortgage. So all this wealth transfer will in one way or form end up in the property market. People will pay down their mortgages and they'll buy an investment property. There'll be a lot of movement in the property market in the 2030s. So if you are playing the property investing game, stick with it for another decade, then things will become really fun.
Well, that's the property markets, and like you, I believe there's a lot of good factors underpinning our markets in the medium term as well. What about Australia's business model, though? Are we going to, as a country, survive? Are we going to thrive, considering all the global issues occurring out there?
Yeah, so our business model is, of course, a simple one in Australia. We dig stuff out of the ground and we grow stuff on top of the ground. We sell it to the world, we make money that way, and we educate a couple of international people and we entertain a couple of international people. That's tourism and international education. That business model is largely linked to the growth of the urban Asian middle class. And Asia, even China, is shrinking its population base, still has about a decade or two worth of urbanization left in them, meaning more people moving from the country into the big cities, bit by bit, reaching the urban middle class of China. And once you become part of the middle class, your main goal is to improve the lot of your kids. And so you look for education elsewhere, you look for to showcase your wealth by, consuming tourism products, traveling overseas. Australia is a simple flight away. That will work very much in our favor. The business model under which Australia operates is not at risk over the coming decade. So we will see more demand for mining, even something like the transition to clean energy, to clean transportation, means all those mining products that go into an electric vehicle battery. That's where Australia plays. We have stuff like nickel, like lithium. We have all those fun things that you need, or even manganese, which you need for steel and iron ore. We have all of this aplenty, and the business model will continue to work for Australia. So we don't need to jump ship. Australia is definitely the right place for future economic challenges. So you can be optimistic about that. But of course, we still have heaps of challenges, and mostly I would argue challenges around how do we manage all of this population growth? How do we, in a proactive way, design and develop our cities that they can cope and thrive under population growth conditions?
Well, as you've said a few times, it's actually not the size of the population that's going to be a concern. It's how our regulators, our administrators, our politicians protect us, look after this great population growth with the right infrastructure. Let's hope they get it right, because they've been falling a bit behind. But I think the conclusion from this is demographics is going to continue to drive our markets, our property markets, our business cycle, and the global demand for what we offer is going to continue on. So once again, Australia truly is the lucky country, Simon.
That's actually such a good term, and this is why it stood the test of time, the lucky country, because we are blessed, we are lucky to be here. And I even think if you're super pessimistic about global trade wars, for example, where the Chinese and the Americans will butt heads, we will always get our most important stuff out of the country. Because even if the US stops securing the world's oceans, China will ensure that we can get our stuff, our energy and our food to them. Remember that China needs us much more than we need China. We only get money from China. Boo-hoo. But China gets food and energy from us. China is a net importer of food and energy. If they stop importing food or energy, they have hundreds of millions of people die within a year or two. So this is quite bad. And so China will, of course, flex. They will let us know who's boss. That means they will occasionally put some random sanctions on us just to show who's boss. But that's essentially what they have to do in order to have Australia play nicely. But it will forever be cheaper for them to buy our stuff than to take Australia with force and then do mining and farming on our lands. That's silly. That'll not happen. So I'm very optimistic that this will continue to occur. And at the same time, as the Chinese economy is shrinking, as the Chinese population ultimately is shrinking, you have India coming along, a market much, much bigger. As of this year, India is now the largest country on the planet. It is very much not China anymore. So there's plenty of growth opportunities in India. Once again, an easy flight away from Australia, comfortable time zone. So it's very, very easy to benefit from this growth market.
And I believe our Prime Minister likes India because they play cricket like we do. So we've got something in common.
We can joke about the cricket relationship there, but I think it makes ultimately the integration of Indian migrants into Australian society rather comfortable. Because if you think about the two bizarre sports that are well beloved in Australia with cricket and footy, these are not all that popular in that many countries across the world. We're just very lucky that the largest country in the world shares the same sporting obsession.
Well, that's a lovely way to finish off our regular monthly chat, Simon. So the future does look bright, and it's easy to see all the things that have gone wrong or can go wrong. We've got to remember all the things that have gone right and will continue to go right. There's more people waking up in the morning pessimistic than optimistic, people wanting to make this a great country. So I look forward to catching up with you again in a month, Simon. Thanks for your time.
I'll be great to be back again.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Simon Kuestenmacher, and if you did and it gave you some insights into our future, your future, why not subscribe to this podcast? Just click the little follow button on whichever podcast app you're listening to this so you can be kept up to date. And in a moment, I'm going to share with you my mindset moment to help you think differently and give you a different result. But before we do, I'd like to just ask you a question. Are you facing some property challenges at the moment? Because you're almost certainly listening to this podcast because you're interested in property. All the negative messages in the media making you feel anxious and uncertain. Maybe you're not sure whether you should buy, whether you should sell, whether you should do anything at all. Now, clearly you're in good company because at Metropole we're seeing a lot of people with concerns. They're worried about making a mistake, buying too early or buying in the wrong location. The banks are giving them a hard time. Others are wondering, should they buy first home or should they invest first? And I know a lot are wondering about, should they be selling an underperforming investment property? Whatever your property question, why not turn to the proven and trusted team at Metropole and take advantage of our experience to give you sound, unbiased advice in the current markets. Now, we don't sell property. We're Australia's largest buyer's agent and we'd love to help you buy property, but buying a property doesn't suit everybody, and that's why we always start off by building you a strategic property plan. Now, currently we're seeing many strategic investors take a long-term focus in getting ready to move into the market, but I don't know your personal circumstances. So why not have a chat with my team and organise a complimentary clarity consultation? Now, interestingly, you've probably heard me say that it's too early to call the market bottom yet, but we're getting there. So whether you're just getting started or wanting to grow your existing portfolio, go to metropole.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show note and have a chat with my team. We're going to offer you a time-tested system, over 50 years of market perspective, over $5 billion worth of property transactions, and true on-the-ground team in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. And as I said, we don't sell property, so our advice is independent and unbiased. And of course, you're going to have access to Metropole Wealth Advisory with Ken Race, our property renovations, development, property management, finance strategists as well. metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
As I get older and wiser, I think there's a real problem going on in the world at the moment. I feel so many people walk around with a general sense of entitlement, and it's damaging to them. Look, the truth may hurt, but the world doesn't owe you anything. Now, I know it may sound harsh, but accepting that truth is essential in maximising your personal development and your financial situation. So that's right. Life doesn't owe you anything. It doesn't owe you perfect or even good parents. Life doesn't owe you health, happiness, abundance, success, comfort, or immunity from pain and problems. Life doesn't owe you a job, a house, a bed, or a single meal. No one really owes you kindness, love, recognition, empathy, apologies, or understanding. You're not entitled to a single thing. Look, even your family owes you nothing. Your government owes you nothing. No one owes you anything at all. And the sooner you take responsibility for yourself and stop relying on others, like the government, like your employers, to take care of you, the sooner you take control of your own financial future. Now, depending on your background and your perspective, this concept might sound scary to you. Now, I'll tell you, it's not nearly as scary as hoping your employer's going to show you the loyalty that you think you deserve when the market changes and they don't have enough work for you, or your employer's going to pay you what you think you're worth when business is good. No, there's no security there. One of the most powerful things that will happen when you accept that no one's going to take care of you financially or in any other way is that you become more motivated to do something. You begin to look more closely at your financial situation. You look at your budget, you look at what you earn, how much you spend, how much tax you pay, you look at your expenses, and then you take responsibility. Now, I'm not sure what's causing all this new sense of entitlement, but I think it's partly due to the cushy way in which children have been raised over the last few decades. Now, call me old and old-fashioned, but children get trophies for just showing up, lest we hurt anyone's feelings by admitting that another child is better than theirs. Children aren't allowed to fail. We can't separate the intelligent from the unintelligent. We're forced to make every person fit into the same mould of life. Now, we know the world's got a bullying problem, but it can't be solved in playground brawls anymore, and the immense immersion of political correctness when we speak and when we engage with others has diminished our chance of honest communication. Now, of course, there's others, people who've been born into family with means, and those people are going to spoil them rotten by rewarding them for simply existing. These kids are going to grow up hearing that they can go to the best schools, they can get the latest smartphones, they can get the best clothes, whatever they deserve, even when they've done nothing to deserve it. They're going to hear all their life and in their teenage years that they're truly remarkable, unique and special. Kids who grew up believing that they were absolutely unique in the world just for being able to stand upright, to shower, to eat, to breathe, very often are going to have a rude and brutal awakening when they get their first job. When they get there, they're not going to be praised by their boss for coming to work in the morning. It will not be okay for them to come 15 minutes late or take longer lunch breaks that last half an hour, longer than they should be. They're going to be criticised for making mistakes. They're not going to be praised for trying if they fail. Only succeeding is going to be good enough. They're soon going to discover they're not really special. They're not really wonderful at all. And that they've got co-workers who are their superiors in just about every way. Now, many people are going to adapt to this and apply themselves to the harsh reality of life. They're going to grow up. They're going to mature. But unfortunately, others will not. They're going to go through life believing what their parents told them. And they're going to blame others when they fail in their relationships, when they're fired from a job, or the next one or the next one. The saying, the world doesn't owe you anything, is another way of saying that you have to contribute before you earn the right to receive contributions. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. Your boss doesn't owe you a promotion, not unless you've worked harder or you've become more qualified or you've deserved it more than others considered for the same position. Your neighbours don't owe you respect unless you act in a way that shows you deserve that respect. Confidence and trust are earned by you, not owed to you. Things like these are what all this saying is about, that your life doesn't owe you anything. In many ways, many people today are living the life of victims. They're giving up their rights to choose, to succeed, and to create their own destiny by sitting back and waiting for scrappy handouts that are left to them. And then, with audacity, these same people feel they've got the right to complain with what they've been given. The problem of entitlement is not one that's going to go away soon. The truth is that people need to realise that the world doesn't owe them anything. We're the ones who owe the world something. We owe the world our talent. We owe the world our skills. We owe the world our ability to take care of our planet. We owe the world the efforts to make the planet happier, a safer place. And until each and every person can get together and realise that within each of us, big and small, black or white, male or female, rich or poor, lies the responsibility to the world, until we realise that, things are going to get worse. But there's good news in all this. In all truth, there lies a treasure. The gift in acknowledging and accepting that the world owes you nothing is that you suddenly realise that every single thing you have is a blessing. Life owes you nothing. And yet, look what you've been given. Be grateful for what you've got. You'll be truly wealthy when you suddenly become grateful. Remember what I've often said in these mindset moments, you can't really be wealthy without gratitude. So be grateful for the people who love you. Be grateful for the pets who adore you. Be grateful for the bed you sleep in and the shoes you walk in. There are plenty of people in this world who wish your worst days would be their best days. So think about it. Your life is overflowing with treasures, and there's not enough time in the day to count them all. But please make sure every day that you do count at least 5 or 10 of your treasures, and then show gratitude for them. Remember them, be grateful for them, and recognise that your cup's not half empty. It's overflowing, and you're entitled to have anything inside it you want. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?